On Friday, I spoke with Senator Marco Rubio. We talked about Venezuela and much more. All right, Senator, thank you very much for joining us today. Happy August recess. I want to start with Venezuela because this is a story that is of concern to so many people in this area, so many people around the country. I know that you have been supportive of the administration's strategy so far and what they have said, but is it enough? And how do you see this playing out?
Well, look, ultimately, the future of Venezuela belongs to the people of Venezuela, and they have a constitution put in by Hugo Chavez that calls for elections. That's what really the request is of their people, and we're just supporting their people in that aspiration. I think the administration's response has been excellent because it's been done the right way. It's been done bipartisan. It's been done working with our regional allies. If you look at what the president has done, the decisions he's made, every single step has been supported from our allies. So here's Donald Trump, the guy that the Western Hemisphere was supposed to hate because we're going to make Mexico pay for the wall and all that. And on Venezuela, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, Peru, Costa Rica, Panama. I mean, literally every country in the region except Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Cuba are supporting us. And every step we take, and in fact, we're doing it together with them. So the response has been good, but ultimately, it's going to come down to whether this international pressure, which now includes the Vatican and the European Union, will force people around Maduro to realize that, you know, we need to get back to the constitutional order of the country. And our hope is to ensure that the people of Venezuela are not, let me say this, that the leaders in Venezuela do not personally benefit from the violations of their own law that they've committed.
Okay, here we are, recess, a time sort of to take stock over the first 6-7 months of the year. This is the first year of your second term as a U.S. Senator. As you come back home and talk to your constituents over the next couple of weeks, what are you going to tell them you're most proud of?
Well, actually, that's a great question because a lot of it didn't get covered because it's not controversial. So we passed the VA Accountability Act. It was a big deal. It was bipartisan. It had been blocked by Democrats for years. We finally reached out and worked with them and got it done. John Tester of Montana, and it basically gives the VA secretary the power to hold accountable the people at the VA that aren't doing a good job. Yesterday, 2 days ago, the last day of the before we broke for recess, we passed the Race for the Cure Act, which now requires, for the first time ever, we are mandating that pharmaceutical companies, when they test a cancer drug on adults, also test it for children because pediatric cancer innovations are not keeping pace.
Right.
It's a big priority for a lot of people. We were able to get, just a couple days ago, working with Bill Nelson, 7-8 new VA facilities in the state of Florida, which are going to be important for a state that has the third largest veteran population in the country. Obviously, on foreign policy, I'm very proud of the work we did and helping guide the president's change of policy towards Cuba, which is already paying dividends. We saw that.
How so?
Well, because the president's strategy was designed to empower the individual entrepreneur in Cuba, but not the military. And what we said and what the policy says is Americans can still travel to Cuba, but you've got to spend your money on the with individual Cubans and their businesses, not with the military. And so what's Castro now doing? He's cracking down on the individual.
Cracking down on individual restaurant owners and people that have tried to start their own businesses.
And he was going to do that anyway, but now he's accelerated that. And so what is clear to the Cuban people now? That the reason why their expectations for a better economic life are not being met is not the embargo. It's the Castro's government unwillingness for them to have a business where they can be independent of the government. But we're going to continue to work to strengthen that because I think we all believe the more people in Cuba can make a living independent of the government, the better chances there are for a free Cuba down the road.
Well, these are all achievements, of course, but I guess I'm talking about big picture stuff. We have a Republican in the White House. We have a Republican-controlled Congress. What major pieces of legislation have you been able to accomplish, and why haven't you been able to do more?
Well, I would say that because it doesn't lead on the newscast doesn't make it not a major piece of legislation. The VA accountability issue.
All right, let's talk about health care, though.
Okay, but just want to touch a point because this is an important point that you point to. The VA issue has been leading the newscasts in this country for 4 years. And we were not able to get accountability done before. And we were finally able to work through it. The White House was supportive, but we were able to put a bipartisan group together to support it. If your family's been impacted by pediatric cancer, this bill had resistance. We had to fight the pharmaceutical companies to get it done. So I get it in terms of not being on the front page, but they are big issues. Now, on health care and issues of that
magnitude. You voted for the so-called skinny bill, the sort of pared down, repeal and replace, a bill that the CBO said would have caused millions of people to lose their insurance, would have raised premiums on elderly and the middle class. Did you think in voting for that you were voting for something that was better than what people had?
Let's talk about the CBO first, because the CBO is not gospel. The CBO is an accounting entity. First of all, when they're by their own admission, their numbers of coverage losses are flawed. They are comparing coverage. They're basically saying 22 million people, comparing it to the Obamacare number projections from April of 2016, numbers that never came to fruition. So by their own admission, the number is wrong, but they just didn't adjust it because they haven't had time.
The CBO is a nonpartisan.
No, but they'll admit it. If you ask them, they'll tell you, you're right. Our numbers are based on something that never happened, but it's the only numbers we can use because we haven't had a chance to redo the numbers.
Okay.
So the number's not accurate. Then they'll also admit to you that the coverage number is wrong, because when you say covered, let me ask you this. If you are 27 or 28 years of age and you have a plan on the exchange with a $15,000 or $10,000 deductible, are you truly covered? Not when your expenses are $8,000 or $9,000 a year. You're not getting insurance coverage. So it's coverage on paper, but it's not real coverage. And on the third thing about premiums, they're guessing, because the truth is insurance is regulated at the state level. And so what the premiums are going to be in Florida versus Delaware, Maine, or anywhere else in the country depend on what the state ultimately decides to do with the flexibility the law will give them. And that is a big part of this. And so there's no way to guess what all 50 states are going to do within their marketplace to create competition and opportunity for new plans to come into the market.
So I just want to make sure when you cast your vote yes in favor of the skinny bill, you thought you were voting for something that would improve the care of the people here in the state of Florida.
I believed I was voting for something that it would improve conditions in Florida better than what they are today. But I still believe we could have made it even better, and had we gone to conference, we would have had a chance to make it even better. For example, on the Medicaid part, Florida already has a waiver. The law allows states to do waivers. Florida already has it.
Right.
The problem with Florida is that because we've been holding the line on the per-patient Medicaid spending, other states that haven't done it have gotten a lot of money per patient. There's an enormous inequity. And one of the things the law allowed us to do is to equalize that a little bit more. So under this proposal, Florida would have gotten more money per patient on Medicaid than it's getting now. Still wouldn't have been equal to California or New York, but it would have been closer and fairer than what we have today.
Let's talk about immigration, because the president came out this week in support of a bill that looks to limit legal immigration and looks to score potential immigrants on a variety of different measures. If this bill were to pass, perhaps your parents wouldn't have been able to get into this country.
Yeah, but that bill's not going to pass.
And you wouldn't be a U.S. senator.
Well, first, a couple things. Number one is that bill's not going to pass, obviously. I think the White House knows you don't have 60 votes for that in the Senate. Number two is it actually has elements of it that were part of the 2013 proposal. In 2013, the very controversial Gang of Eight, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, proposed moving legal immigration towards a more merit-based system. Now, not as far as this bill did, but it most certainly moved it in that direction, and that's something that I support through a point system. So there would be points for things like knowing English. It wouldn't be entirely merit-based, but it would be more merit-based, and it has to be in the 21st century. When my parents came here in 1956, we had a very different economy. We had an economy that had a plethora of low-wage, low-skilled jobs. That's not the case anymore, and our immigration system needs to reflect it. And that's why in 2013, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans proposed changes to the system that looked like that. Didn't go as far as what the president's proposing,
yes,
but it moved in that direction.
What about the spirit of this bill, though, and what it means for families like yours that came to this country or are looking to come to this country to make a better life for themselves?
That's a valid point, but here's the difference. They came at a different era in our history. Our laws always are adjusted for the era in which we lived in. Moving towards a more merit-based system of immigration is a reality in the 21st century. That's why every other industrialized country in the world is doing that. In essence, my argument, I don't want to limit legal immigration. I certainly want to change the way we conduct it, because we are in an economic competition for talent. And we have to have an immigration system that allows us to do that. And so giving more points for merit and less points for family connection is an appropriate adjustment in the 21st century economy. You came here in 1956, there were thousands of jobs with people with a 6th-grade education. In the 21st century, if you don't have some advanced education, you're going to struggle to succeed. The evidence all around us. Our immigration system should reflect that in some way. Where I probably have a big difference of opinion with this bill is it sets an arbitrary cap on the number of people that are able to come through a green card. And I don't think that should be an arbitrary cap. I think the number should be driven by demand, by the economic demand, not simply a number we come up with because someone wants to restrict the number of people coming.
This is a president, if you believe the polls, who is incredibly unpopular around the country. He's even losing support, according to the latest polls from Quinnipiac, with his own base. At what point do you, as a Republican senator, say, you know what? I can't hitch my wagon to this administration anymore. I've got to go my own way. I've got to forge my own path. We Republicans in the U.S. Senate, we've got to do what we think is right for the country, even if it doesn't jibe with the president's agenda.
Well, I think that happens now. In essence, what I say to you is, and I've told people from the beginning, it's a very simple equation. I told this to my staff right after the election. If the president is wrong, or I believe he's wrong about something, I'm going to try to change his mind on it. If he still does what I think is wrong, I'm going to oppose it. And if he does what is right, I'm going to support it. And that's the way we approach everything. So, for example, I think he was wrong on Russia. I voted for sanctions on Russia. And he threatened to veto it, and we said, if you veto it, you're going to get overridden. I think, you know, that's example of that. I thought that I was concerned about the direction the administration might head on Cuba policy, so I got engaged in that and tried to influence it in the appropriate way. But when he does something right, like what he's done on Venezuela, I'm going to say that they're doing it the right way. So it's an issue-by-issue situation. In essence, the Senate is the co-equal branch of government. And my view every day is, if I have the ability to influence the direction the White House is headed on an issue, I'm going to try to influence it in a positive direction. If ultimately they choose to go in a different direction, then I'll have to try to stop it and do what I can. And that's what we've tried to do for the first 7 months.
On Russia, does it worry you that this president does not seem concerned that Russia tried to interfere with our elections?
Yeah, and I've said that, and I've said that to them. And look, I think it's deeper than that. A lot of people, there is an argument among some in the foreign policy circles that the relationship with Russia now has gotten too bad, and that we need to deal with them, and there needs to be some equilibrium in them. And there's some validity to that argument to a certain extent, so long as we are clear about Vladimir Putin. Look, the Russians are not the Soviet Union. They are not a global superpower, but they do have asymmetrical capabilities, cyber attacks, airstrikes in Syria.
They can do a lot of damage very cheaply.
Right, and so that's one of the things we have to recognize. And the other is that Vladimir Putin is a cost-benefit analysis operator. He views the world through a cost and a benefit. He felt that the cost of intruding in Ukraine were lower than the benefits of doing so because of a sphere of influence. So as long as we're open-minded about that and realize that, there's always room for some level of realism in geopolitics, so long as we recognize that to be the case. That said, what I'm not going to do is excuse human rights violations, right? So I want to rename the street in front of the Russian embassy after Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was killed, or Boris Nemtsov, I'm sorry, who was killed by the Kremlin. And there's people fighting me on it because they think that would be an unnecessary irritant. So it's complex, but am I concerned that he underestimates the influence that the Russians had in terms of interfering in the election? I am. And that's one of those issues that we can convince them otherwise, but we're going to do what we need to do to protect the country.
Real quickly, is there any scenario where you become so concerned with this administration or with this president that you would consider challenging him in a Republican primary?
Well, I'm not. No. I'm not thinking about running in any Republican primary. I'm not running in the Republican primary. I am enjoying my service in the Senate. I think that's a hypothetical that isn't even worth exploring because it isn't going to happen that way. I expect that the performance in the White House will improve significantly now with General Kelly there, and ultimately, but the thing about it is this, you know, my first 6 years in the Senate, my first 2 years I was in the minority with a Democrat president. My second 2 years I was in the majority but with a Democrat president. My last 2 years I was running for president. Now I come back with a level of 6 years of experience, access to the White House, a better understanding of how the process works, and I feel good about the progress we've made. I'm enjoying and fulfilled by the work we're doing, and I think we have a chance to do some great things in the months to come. The Everglades funding, I told the president, you have a chance. We were flying into Miami for the Cuba event. We flew over the Everglades, and you could see it from the window. I said, you have a chance to go down as the Everglades president.
That's a bipartisan bill you're working on with Senator Nelson.
Well, it's actually, at this point, just funding. I mean, getting the money flowing on a year in, year out. But what a great legacy. If he is reelected, he served 7 years. Part of his legacy will be he was the president that restored and protected this national treasure. I think that's a great thing that hopefully we can influence him to be supportive of. And things like that. Tax reform, child tax credit, working with Ivanka Trump to increase the per-child tax credit, to address paid family leave, which if you work in government or in a big business, you have. But if you make $35,000 or $40,000 a year and you have a child, that could be a bankruptcy triggering event because you don't get paid for 2 months. Addressing that. I mean, we have a chance to do some unique things that aren't often attributed to Republicans, but I think are part of a generational reality. I know, maybe for people that are a little older than me in the Senate, they've never lived through that, but I've seen it in my own family and the people I grew up with. That's been a real factor.
You were all set to enter the private sector. You weren't going to run for a second term. Somebody got in your ear and changed your mind on that. Now that you're here, we're in the Trump era. Any regrets?
No, about running again?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it would have made more money, probably had more time, but probably would have traveled as much and worked as hard. I think the one thing I look back at is and say, who knows what the opportunities were there and what they'll be in the future. But here's what I can tell you, and that is I know for sure I'd be sitting there thinking, wow, man, if I was there, this is what I would be doing, what I would be saying. And so I look back and I say, you know, we made the right decision, and I'm glad to be back, and I'm truly enjoying our time and our service there and the difference we're being able to make. And I think we've got some exciting things that we're going to be able to work on. They may not lead the newscast, but I think they're going to help people's lives. In the end of the day, our job is to make things better. We'll never make them perfect, but our job is to try to make things better. And if that means incrementally, sometimes you got a chance to take a big leap, sometimes it's in steps. But anything that makes things better than the way they are now is the kind of thing I need to be for.
Senator Rubio.